This is the lab 11 for the AZ500. In this lab, we're going to review all the security features built into Secure Your Azure SQL database. We're going to start by deploying a custom template. Now, this template is available from the GitHub AZ500 download. And one quick point of note is that if you are deploying this template using Azure PaaS, you may want to select region ECUS2. There's some limitations to the Azure PaaS. Okay, so you do a custom template deployment, load up module 11 azure deploy.json, and send it for creation. Fast forward this a bit. All right, so the resource template is deployed. Let's go to the resource group. Now, understand that Azure SQL database is consists of two resources. One is your server security settings, and these security settings applies to all the database that attaches to it. So here is the actual database where our data is stored, and this is our server object. Okay, so let's click on the server object. All right. So in this section, you'll find under security settings. In this lab, we'll take a look at auditing, advanced data security. So let's go to advanced data security. We're going to turn on the advanced data security. Now there's a cost associated with it. So we're going to create a new storage account. All right. So I'm going to pick a globally unique name to store the various reports logs. So it's going to take a moment to create a storage account and return you back to the advanced security, advanced threat protection page. All right. So you would want to schedule a periodic report, a regular scan against your database, and you can configure a regular report delivery to your email address. Now, in the advanced threat protection type, this is going to watch out for all these different types of attack. Now, each one of these will have an example of what type of activity. All right, so click on Save, and we'll let the Azure's Cloud Intelligence help us defend our database. All right, so next capability is called data classification. Now, with this service, we have to navigate to the database themselves. All right. So under the security settings per database, okay, we're going to select Advanced Data Security. All right. We're going to select Data Discovery and Classification. Now, this is going to scan the database looking for personally identifiable information. So in this case, it identified columns as well as tables that contain sensitive data. All right, so we're going to click on this. We have found 15 columns. That's recommended to be classified as security sensitive information. All right, so notice it labels the sensitivity, the type of information. All right, so this makes short work by accepting these selected recommendation. Now, by labeling these columns, Azure can apply the threat analysis against attempt to access these columns. All right, so once it's saved, you can close the screen. Go back to overview. Let's force a refresh. All right, so still applying. All right, so make sure after you select accepted recommendations, you click on the Save button. That's the number one thing. Always forget to click the save button. Okay. All right, so back to the overview page, it will see certain columns being defined as confidential. So attempt access to these columns will now be analyzed by the advanced data security. And next up, auditing. So let's go back to let's talk about auditing for a second. There is auditing at the server level as well as the database level. So we are going to start by looking at the auditing at the server object. All right. So here we're going to turn on auditing, and we have three places where we can send our audit entry to. Now the three different destination represents long-term analytics. So if you want to store them in the storage and perhaps parse them using some sort of big data solution to analyze a long-term trend. Okay, so that's storage. And they are stored as long as you want, as long as you're paying for the storage. You're good for that. And retention 0 will retain them forever. Okay. Log analytics. This is for you to be able to build a data warehouse against these auditing entries. The data warehouse would then be able to answer your query very quickly. You can use log analytic queries against these data. And typically we use this to build dashboards. Event Hub sends every auditing entry as event. Typically you can then define a stream analytic job against Event Hub. And the goal here is real time. So the three destination, archive, and permanent storage. Okay. For batch processing or big data processing. And this is for dashboard building and fast exploratory queries. While the Event Hub is the real-time response to these auditing entries via stream analytics. Okay, and there are other ways you can make use of these events that's stored in the Event Hub. But typically stream analytics is a pretty polished product designed for Event Hub. All right, so go ahead and save those changes. All right. Now we're going to navigate to the database and turn on database level auditing. So select the database. And you'll find down here auditing as well. All right, so we can choose to use the same storage account. Now you can define once again retention days for these auditing entries. All right, so as your database is being accessed, these audit entry will be generated. All right, so there's that. Now the lab exercise doesn't go into things like transparent data encryption. This ensures data stored at rest is always encrypted. Okay, this is not the same as column level encryption. This encrypts your data file, this encrypts your backups at rest. Transparent. Dynamic data masking hides data as it leaves your database server. So if someone makes a query and the dynamic data masking rule applies to them, they will see masked data. It doesn't affect how the data is stored in the data file. So dynamic data masking does not apply to DBAs. DBA will always be able to see unmasked data. So here you can specify what table and perhaps you would like to mask email address. Okay, and you can choose a default masking or show the first letter and the top level domain. So this will add a masking rule. Any user in the database that's not excluded from dynamic data masking, when they query the table, they will just see that. Okay. Now remember, keep in mind that DBAs will not be subject to these dynamic data masking rules. All right. So these are the built-in security features for the Azure database. Now, naturally, there's a couple more things I want to highlight. Above and beyond the labs. Now, when you're at the server, remember there's a server level firewall. Okay. So when you look at the SQL Server under security settings, all right, you'll find firewall and virtual networks. Your Azure SQL Server is running on the Azure infrastructure platform. It will be accessible over the internet. So this firewall controls what client IP address is allowed to connect. Now you can also have VNet connecting to the database, okay? Because you don't always have a public IP exit out of virtual network. So you can use this to specify which virtual network has access to these servers. There's also a database level firewall rule. Now you're not going to find the database level firewall rule using the portal GUI, because the database level firewalls are stored in each database data dictionary, and the rules in the database firewall rule is considered first. So if there is a rule in that database that allows certain IP address, it will be allowed before the server firewall rule is checked. It is designed that way so your database can be portable. So if you have a database on this server that allows IP address 1234, when you move this database to a different server, those rules will follow that database because it's part of the data dictionary. Now you create those database firewall rules using T-SQL. So you need to make a connection to the database and run a store procedure to create those rules. All right, so that concludes the lab number 11. Don't forget to clean up the resource group.